Should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
My name is Brandon Lee. I am the visual manager for Bonobos. Before that, I was with Ralph Lauren for about 6-7 years in various positions doing visual work. And then right before that, I was with Barney's doing windows. So I would say of my, if any of you guys are familiar with Bonobos, we're really new. And in the last like 5 months, pretty much since I've joined, we've opened like 5 more stores. We have like 15 now. And actually, the existing 10 stores look completely different than like the 5 or 6 that have landed now. And so my favorite display, more as not necessarily display, but like overall aesthetic, is our newest store we just opened up in Brookfield, which is the new development in World Trade Center on Thursday. So if you ever have a chance, go look at that store. That as a whole is probably what is my favorite of what I'm just doing at Bonobos.
Hi, I'm Denise Foley. I work for Montclair. I'm the visual manager for now North and South America. We have about, we're at 11 stores now in the US. So USA, Canada, and Brazil, soon to be 16 stores. We're growing very, very fast in this market. We're a European brand. Started out as a French brand. It's now owned by an Italian company. So we are Milan-based, and all of my direction comes from Italy. I have things made and produced here in the States, and opening stores and traveling like a crazy woman. Hardly ever in New York anymore. But it's a great brand, huge growth. We do pretty intense windows, and we change them quite a bit. That's the one thing I can say about Montclair. As a brand, they put a lot of money and expectations into the windows. As a brand, we have a similar aesthetic happening globally. So whatever windows I'm putting in here in New York, you'll more than likely see in China, Japan, and throughout Europe. So they're very much about controlling the brand image and about having a similar aesthetic throughout every store. That said, my favorite windows, it's gonna be a hard one. We did these cool windows maybe the second year I was there, where it was supposed to mimic the inside of an old plane where you were almost like skydivers jumping out. Where we did, it was a perspective, so you had mannequins lined up on either side. A lot of metal, they were kind of elevated up like this above the floor. The floor itself was a light box with a sky print, and then the back wall was a 3-dimensional vintage fan that actually moved. They were intense. They were intense to build. They were intense to install. It was very expensive, but they were pretty cool. One of my favorites. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Shatayla, and I was most recently the visual merchandising manager for Old Navy at the 34th Street location. Before then, I was with Love Culture for a while, and I have also worked with Nordstrom as well. And I'm at the store level. I love being in the store. My formal training, is corporate, but I love the action of putting in place the windows myself. And my favorite window, I think my favorite campaign in general was probably our most recent Fall in Love campaign. This huge display on the 34th Street entrance of our store, and it was, it was a young lady and her family, her husband and her son, but it was just very family oriented. It made you feel very warm. And in the window, we had children looking like they were playing, and on the other side, we displayed the clothing that they were wearing. So it was, like I said, it made you feel like, oh, like you're at home. I loved it.
Excellent. Thank you for indulging me with your favorite displays. So the first question that I have is, is the basic, all of the people here are really interested in the visual field, but, we'd love to hear what drew you guys into it. What inspired you guys to work in visual merchandising?
So for me, like growing up, I didn't really, like going to college, I was an English major at University of Michigan. I grew up like always doing like little creative projects, I was painting, drawing, like building a lot of random stuff in cardboard. Then I always knew I liked fashion, but I was like, I don't think I'm going to be a designer. So it was like, I knew what I liked, and it ended up being an English major because at the time I wanted to be a writer. But upon getting about to graduate, I was fortunate enough to have an internship doing window display for Barney's. And eventually that led to a full-time job. And I remember somebody we shared in common, Zach, who's my boss at the time. My boss at the time there, he was like, well, what do you want to do for your first display? He was like, you can do whatever you want. I was like, all right, I like cardboard. He was like, make something out of cardboard. Base it around that. And I ended up making this like 7-foot tall cardboard flower, basing it around that. And then I knew at that moment, that was like my very first display thing, my very first official display job. And I was like, this is like, I found an avenue, a career where my kind of hobbies actually had a path. And that path was like being like really creative with your hands, spontaneous, and like just using garbage to make it into gold. That was like, and at Barney's at the time, that was a little while ago, that was highly regarded because one, we didn't have any money too, which you'll find. But that's like what people like, and that was the humor of it, and that really drew me in as I was like, this is a career where I can make high-end display from garbage, and I thought it was really fun.
Well, I sort of fell into it, to be honest with you. Originally I went to school for business with a minor in fashion. I knew I loved the fashion business. I ended up working in retail for a while, worked on the buying side for a while, which the numbers part, the spreadsheets, all that I hated. And it was a small company back in Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. And my boss and I used to go out to the stores, and we would do the floor sets and try to get our stuff onto the floor and help the stores get them merchandised. And it was really sort of where I found that that's what I really like to do. And she had gone to FIT years before and had suggested to me, she said, you know what, this is really kind of the way you should go. So I went back to school, went to FIT for display and exhibit, which is what it was called at the time. It wasn't visual merchandising, it was just display, and loved it. And I was lucky that I had someone who really kind of mentored me and pushed me in that direction. But yeah, I moved back to Boston, worked for Lord & Taylor, doing the interiors and the windows in that store, worked for the company for a very long time, ended up here in New York for a few years doing the windows here, and then sort of evolved. I've worked at Bloomies, I worked at Bergdorf's, and now ended up at Moncler. So it's an interesting industry. You find a lot of people sort of from different walks of life, and I think different creative paths kind of find their way there.
Well, for me, I was pre-vet. I was destined for UM. Yep. Nobody could tell me different. I was going to be a veterinarian. I was going to save all the puppies' lives in the world. And on the side, I was like, well, I just want to get a little retail job, work at the mall, make a little extra money, put gas in my car. And when I would work with my store manager sometimes, and he would say, let's do this display and dress this mannequin. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. And then I realized, okay, put this outfit on the mannequin and it's flying out the door. So I was like, wait a minute. So we're telling them what to buy and they don't even know it. So I just got more into it, and I was like, I love the conspiracy of this. Let's do it. And completely changed my major. Ended up at Florida State. I was dual major at the time. I was merchandising and design, but thanks to budget cuts, they just combined the major. It became retail merchandising and product development. So, they go over everything there. And my first job out of college, I was able to exercise my creative thinking and my evil plan of selling all the clothes in our store at Love Culture to all these unsuspecting people. And it was great. It was really great to realize that you can literally impact someone's life through the placement of your product. So that's the part that really takes me.
But I'd love to hear about, is that the biggest challenge? What challenges do you guys face? Because I know, out of all of the jobs in the fashion industry, you guys probably have the most hands-on, which can be great, but can also be, a curse and a blessing.
Right. So I think the budget thing, there's one huge challenge. Budget is kind of that comes case by case. The budget is like, I've worked for, like I was saying, Barney's, there's no budget. Ralph Lauren, there is a budget, but it's very, it's like you have a budget, but then you're expected to make something 20 times more than that. So it feels like you don't have a budget. And now I'm back to no budget again. You always find a way to deal with that. It is a constraint, but I would say more so than that for me, across the years I've been doing this, is that if you think about like how people shop, like when I shop, if I walk into a store and if it's dull, if it's the same thing, you see all over and over again, it's like, it's not inspiring to shop. But if I go in and I'm seeing something new, seeing, like a hint of freshness to it, then that inspires me to shop. So knowing that about how people shop, I feel like the biggest challenge is knowing that you have to keep the stores fresh and new constantly, like every single month, if not more. And that is the challenge, is like you have to be organized, you have to time manage, you have to plan months in ahead. And that for me is the biggest challenge, is knowing that you have to, because the product is flowing no matter what, monthly it's gonna be there, you have to do something about it. And with that too, is like with window display, you have to be constantly on your creative. You always have to have like a tool bag of ideas. You have to know what you're doing almost like a year in advance. And that's a big challenge, because for me, like when I was growing up, I was like, whenever I had a weird idea, I would just like do it. And I don't know where the ideas come from, but now being in this kind of path that I'm in, you're almost forced to be creative on a monthly basis. And the way I kind of challenge that is like, I'm always taking pictures of things I like. I'm always writing down ideas, always surrounding myself with people who I admire and I look, forward to working to. I think that's the biggest thing to combating that challenge, is of having to be creative on a monthly basis.
On my side, it's a little different. I would say, we're a large company. There's definitely a direction that comes from our corporate office. It's trickled down to me, and then I sort of manage it corporately for my region. So within that, we're doing, every 3 weeks, we're doing changes. So with us, we never put everything that we own on the floor, which for me, the challenge becomes, it's what the creative team wants, and then what the people who are managing the sales budgets and are looking at the numbers want. So it's financial versus creative. And it's across the board. I would say any place I've ever worked, there's always been this sort of like push and pull. Creatively, they know that what you're doing is going to help them with business. But then there's also that point where they're also thinking about, well, what if we get 5 more styles on the floor? What if we get more of this out? What if we get more of this out? And it's always a little bit of a back and forth, because you have to sort of step back and say, well, what's right for the overall vision of the brand? What's right for the space? And are we representing the product and also the image of the company the way it should be? So for me, I'm always sort of in that middle, trying to make both sides happy, which can be quite challenging, I would say. But we do a 3-week rotation. So every 3 weeks, if the window sets don't physically change, the mannequins will change. When we do that, the entire store flips. So whatever color story has been put out, normally we'll go back downstairs and we'll pull new things out. Usually what will happen is, right as I'm starting to do that, the buyers will sort of be like, oh, this hasn't been selling, this hasn't been selling. And I'll get this whole list of, can you get this on the floor? And half of it, sometimes I'll say, okay, have them pull around, but I'll see what I can do. This is the easiest way to sort of appease everybody. 9 times out of 10, it's a color story that it's going out in another month. So I'm like, guys, No, because you know this is going out later, so what are you doing? Yeah. Or then I'll try to see if do they have that style in a color that works on the floor, to kind of try to help them. But there's the creative piece, but then you also have to be very business minded as well, because at the end of the day, you are working for a brand, you are trying to help them make money, and it's a business. So it's a very push and pull, back and forth kind of situation.
Well, I giggled to your point because literally what she's saying translates into my position at the store. I've been on both ends of the spectrum. Being with Love Culture, they're a newer company, so I had a lot of freedom to literally do whatever I wanted to do creatively, and their operations and their visuals completely separate. So I did no selling, I didn't know any numbers, all I knew was to make it pretty. So every week I come in, I did my mannequins once a week, I changed my walls every week, I literally would just go around the store rotating the product every single week, and finding out later, dipping into the numbers, because in my head I'm like, okay, I'm doing all this work, but how am I impacting the business? And I never knew, because visuals were not allowed to have any access to the numbers. So being with Old Navy, it's that literal push and pull, because they want you to be a business owner. As a visual manager, you need to know why you put it there. You need to know how many you sold yesterday. You need to know how many you sold last week. You need to be able to speak to that. So it's funny because, we had a team of visuals, and you have some people who are very subjective, and they're like, oh, but it's so pretty. And then you have me, I'm like, yeah, but it's not selling. So, it can look pretty all at once, but at the end of the day, like she was saying, we're here to make money for our business. So you have to find that sweet spot where, you can place your product and you can do a great display, or you can style a mannequin very well, but using maybe something that's not selling well with something that's selling well, and making it stylish and fashionable at the same time, while remembering, okay, this outfit I built will cost $100. So again, it goes back to the psychology of it. Your customer doesn't realize, oh, I love that outfit, I want to buy it, and then they're like, oh, it's $100. That's $100 you just made off of one outfit. So you just have to, it's finding that balance, and through experience, I think I've learned that it's you never win that battle. You really don't. You just don't ever win that battle.
That's such an interesting point. I'm thinking about, a lot of the people here are students and young alums. In entry-level visual merchandising jobs, sometimes they get access to those numbers, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's like, this is how you set up the floor plan, and that's it. Do you think it's worth them asking and trying to get involved in
Absolutely.
that? Do you think that they would get pushback? I mean, you guys have worked for a variety of different places, and like you said, sometimes they're just like, well, we're not telling you those numbers.
Well, when I was in the place at Old Navy too, because I would get the numbers from corporate, I shared it with my team every morning.
Okay.
Every morning down to the sales associates, because I feel like in order to create ownership of that business, they need to know why they have to recover that table so well. Well, because it's our number one seller, so it needs to, you know what I mean? So I think it's very important to share that information. And obviously you don't have to go down to, the percentage of the business that it's doing last week and so on and so forth, but just something, having them know a little bit more about what's going on with the product that they're touching every day helps them feel more responsibility towards it.
Interesting.
I think at Ralph Lauren, when you're in creative there, it's like Ralph Lauren's been, obviously, it's got an established name. And their display is more of like, it's almost like showing off for the brand, So there, it's not quite as much, I'll be honest, it's not quite as much focusing on the business part of it. The creative team is separate from the business aspect. So I had that part growing up in visual. So when I moved to Bonobos, we're a small company, just getting out of the startup phase. Every cent is looked at. And I think, if you guys have that background of knowing the business of fashion, it's definitely going to help you in this world too. Because I would say not all the time that you're going to encounter an employer that it's, you're just spending all the money on visual and there's no reason behind it besides just to look good. Now, where I'm at now, it's the same thing. So you have to look at the numbers. You have to know why you're putting something here. And it's a simple fact, like for me, if I see something in a window that I like, a piece of clothing, I've all the time. I don't, sometimes I don't even look at the display. I see, I like this pair of shoes, I'm gonna go in, I buy it. That's as simple and as like, almost like the most simple business part of the visual thing. It doesn't have to be like that elaborate, but when your company gets to that point when you can show off a little more, that just adds to the brand. But at the very base of it, knowing you know, what product is what you bought more of, and the numbers behind why you have this product existing in your store, that for me is especially more important than just making, especially now where I'm at now, it's more important than just making things look pretty. There has to be a reason why you're doing it.
Yeah,